sources within the church, I was given a figure of over 20,000. Two different sources came back to me and said that number is actually more specific and gave me a figure of 23,720. They told me that they had accessed the internal database, and that figure was based on child molesters in the USA, Canada, and Europe. And that's the figure that they were given.
Over 20,000 names on a secret database. That's why these people say the church has to listen. With Bill Bowen, they're calling for the Jehovah's Witnesses to come clean about their record on child abuse. His campaign, Silent Lambs, has already heard from 5,000 victims. This candlelit vigil is for them.
Or is what they're doing, once it's found out, causing their own members to be deeply disturbed.
Heather Berry and her stepsister, Holly Brewer, have flown here from New Hampshire. The man who abused them has been jailed for a minimum of 56 years. He was Heather's father. Now Heather and Holly are breaking new ground. They're taking the Jehovah's Witnesses to court.
I'm Heather from New Hampshire. I don't want to tell my story, but I've heard the word victim too many times today. And all of us are standing out here today. We're standing tall and proud and saying this happened and then it can't happen, and we're survivors. And we're fighting, and we're not victims.
They're the first of those survivors to take their fight to court. They're claiming that not only did the church do nothing when they were abused, it ostracized and punished the family when they called the police.
I'm very glad I came. Like I said, I would do it again, and again, and again, and as many times as it takes to get a change in the policies and things that they hide constantly.
I'm really glad that the policy was talked about so much today, that it's an actual policy. It's not just a few elders that want to hide things. It comes from higher up.
It's a worldwide policy.
Yeah.
We asked the church for an interview to discuss the claims that they're putting thousands of children at risk. They offered us instead some videotapes.
Well, here we have it. A box full of tapes, in fact. Jehovah's Witnesses response, progressive understanding of paedophilia, education through publications, and one marked policies, and I'm told that's where we should get some answers.
That night we watched the tapes looking for those answers. In long letters, the organisation had told us the welfare of children is of paramount concern to them, that they have a forceful child protection policy. We wanted to see it spelled out.
We've heard the suggestion that our policies may not be adequate to cover the problem of child molestation, but that's not the case at all.
The policy couldn't be simpler. The elders should deal with all allegations of abuse.
I think that's a very good policy, that the elders, essentially would take charge of the situation of reporting the abuse to the authorities.
But the authorities they're told to contact aren't the police. It's their own legal desk.
Fact of the matter is, we have a very aggressive policy to handle child molestation in the congregation, and it is primarily designed to protect our children.
So how aggressive is it in practice? Just over a year ago, Bill Bowen rang the legal desk in New York, asking how he should handle an allegation of abuse in his congregation. The advice he was given has little to do with protecting the victim. He was told to go back to the man accused.
You just ask him again, now, is there anything to this? If he says no, then I would walk away from it. Yeah. Leave it for Jehovah. He'll bring it out. Yeah. But don't get yourself in a jam.
Leave it for Jehovah. That, according to thousands of victims, is the Jehovah's Witness child protection policy laid bare. No one knows more about that than Sarah Poisson. Holly Brewer and Heather Berry's mother knows her loyalty to the church cost her daughters dearly. Paul Berry, her husband, beat them. She suspected worse, that Heather was being sexually abused, and went to the elders.
I could tell from their looks on their faces that I'd done a bad thing, that I had spoken against my husband, which is a bad thing. And so their solution was that I should be a better wife and I should pray more. That was their solution. That's how I could stop him from battering us. I assumed they were right. They had to be right, because they know everything, because they're God's representatives on earth.
She couldn't convince them, but she was convinced that Paul Berry was sexually abusing their daughter, Heather.
When I was about 3 years old, I started displaying behavior that no 3-year-old in their right mind would display. And I was throwing stools out of 2-story windows, and I was, I went to Boston Children's Medical Hospital in the psychiatric ward when I was 3 because she found me stabbing myself with a screwdriver in the arm in the kitchen. He came to me in the blackened night, hands outstretched. There was no fight. The masked man slowly became familiar with my shape, gently rubbing his hands on me, every nook, cranny, and gate. My child, you are so sweet, so perfect and right. Then I knew nothing but defeat. I tried not to think about the abuse as much as possible. I mean, like, there was the physical abuse, there was the verbal abuse, and there was the sexual abuse, and when none of it was happening, that was ideal, and that's what I tried to focus on the most.
And all the while, you were going to the Kingdom Hall every Sunday? You were going to meetings during the week?
We were going out in door-to-door service.
Time and again, the girls were told to wait outside while their mother begged local elders for help. Time and again, they saw her sent home to pray harder and be a better wife. Holly, too, had her own story to tell. The story she'd kept secret from her mother. A story she knew by now the elders wouldn't want to hear. Her instinct was to tell the local policeman, but after years in the church, she just couldn't.
Holly would actually tell me that she was very angry about things at home, and she did, on more than several occasions, tell me that someday, Sergeant Zeller, I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. And I always told Holly, when you're ready, I'll be there. You know where I am.
Her mother saw the elders more than a dozen times, but remarkably, it never struck Sarah Poisson to look for help outside the church.
You can say that your children's lives are in danger, and in the same breath that you couldn't possibly go to the police. How can that be?
Because God would not want that. It would never have occurred to me. And even if it had, I would not have done it. Because he's a man. He's a baptized male, and he's a ministerial servant, and I was a woman, and they're kids. And that's even worse than being a woman. These things need to stay in this room. I heard that many, many times. You need to pray about it more. I can show you my Bible. It's paper thin. I still have it. It's all worn out. Did a lot of praying.
After you were told them that her father was sexually abusing Heather, nothing changed?
No. Well, yeah, things changed. They got a lot worse for me.
In the end, the decision was taken out of her hands. In school, bruises were noticed on her children. Social workers were told. They gave her a stark choice. Leave your husband, or we take your children. But if she left him, she knew the church would cut her dead.
At that point, I had to make a decision between God and my kids. And I knew, well, at that time I knew, that if I chose my kids, I didn't have a prayer. But I didn't care anymore. So we lost everything in one day.
Sarah Poisson had no life outside the Kingdom Hall. When the congregation cast her out, she had no choice but to move away. She didn't just lose every friend she had. Overnight, she was homeless, penniless, scraping a living to bring up her children. The friends they'd had openly shunned them. But with the family now free of the church, Holly could finally tell her mother the truth. Her stepfather had abused her too. When he tried to gain access to her younger sister, Holly finally did what the elders hadn't. She walked into the local police station.
It was clear to me that it was a life's crossing, a road to cross. Never any doubt in my mind that Holly could do it. It was a tremendous effort on her part, and it smacked of raw courage from beginning to end.
The Holly Brewer who walked into his office that day was a very changed, a very defiant young woman.
My earliest memory is like about 3 years old. My latest memory is 10 years old. And he gradually worked into being interested in me to full-blown sex, intercourse, over those years.
It was a harrowing time. The police took Holly back to the house where the abuse had started.
He had a room that he had found in our very, very old house that was underneath the barn that you had to crawl through a hole to get to. And once you were in there, you were isolated from the entire house and from everything. And that's where everything would go down.
Would he kneel down on next to you or over you?
He'd sit anywhere, just sit and let me do whatever I was going to do.
Okay. All right.
And just and I'd lean over.
Uh-huh. And did he tell you what he wanted you to do?
I knew after a while.
Okay.
She told the police exactly what Berry had wanted, of the brutal sexual assault she'd suffered throughout her childhood.
I had no vision of me growing up and being 16. I thought he was eventually going to kill me, you know, and then I'd be free, and that's the way I looked at it.
I'm doing good.
It's crazy.
It's really hard to come back here, I know that.
I know.
You know?
He'd say things like, "Thank you for obeying me." And he'd thank me for obeying him and reminding me that word, the obey word. That was a big thing.
Well then.
Paul Berry was confident Holly would never go to the elders. Apart from anything else, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a clear rule on sin. They need 2 witnesses or a confession before they'll take action.
Do you remember?
As Holly told her story, it seemed to police that this rule in a strict religious community would have let the abuse continue.
All the way up to here.
So this is the same sheet that was here before?
All the same.
All right.
Sexual abuse of children is not to be tolerated.